My name is Caleb Shaw, but people just call me Cal. I'm 47 years old, and my life is built on things that are solid, things that are real. In my workshop, Shaw Woodcraft Designs, I take massive raw slabs of Oregon timber and turn them into furniture. Live edge tables that follow the natural curve of the tree. Custom pieces from reclaimed wood that carry a history within their grain. My hands are permanently stained with varnish, and the scent of sawdust is my cologne. It's a good life, a life of substance. I paid off my mortgage 15 years early, and I'm raising 4 great kids who are the only part of my marriage that turned out exactly right. My wife, Genevieve, soon to be ex-wife, I'm learning to say, exist in a different universe entirely. She's the director of an elite art gallery in downtown Portland, a world of sterile white walls, overpriced champagne, and people who buy things instead of making them. She's beautiful, ambitious, and she sees my craft as little more than sophisticated manual labor. For years, I told myself we balanced each other out. I was the craftsman who kept our lives grounded. She was the socialite who gave us class. I built things meant to last for generations. She built a network of wealthy clients. I was the substance. She was the style. Turns out, I was just the foundation she was embarrassed to stand on. That's why, for the last 5 years, I was her plus none at all, her gallery galas and award dinners. She'd always have a reason. You wouldn't enjoy it, Cal. Or you make the patrons uncomfortable when you ask what they actually do for a living. So, I stayed home, lost myself in the grain of a new piece of maple, and told myself it was normal. Until last Tuesday, she walked into my workshop, my sanctuary, her expensive perfume clashing with the smell of cedar. She stood there in her designer shoes, looking completely out of place on the sawdust-covered floor. "You have to come to the gallery's winter benefit this year," she said. Not, "I'd like you to come, but have to." Like I was a piece of inventory she needed to display. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. And it was a red flag the size of a redwood. I should have known right then that something was about to burn to the ground. The benefit was held at the Hawthorne Contemporary Arts Center, a place so white and minimalist it felt less like a gallery and more like a high-end laboratory. I stood there in my one good suit, feeling like a lumberjack at a vegan convention. Genevieve, however, was in her element. She wore a sleek black dress that was more of a suggestion than an item of clothing, gliding through rooms filled with abstract metal sculptures and canvases that were just a single block of color. She transformed the second we walked in. Her laughter became a little too loud. Her touch on people's arms a little too familiar. When she introduced me, it was always the same tight dismissive line, "This is my husband, Cal. He makes furniture." She'd say it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes before expertly steering the conversation back to art installations, leaving me standing there like a hand-carved coat rack. I was an embarrassing footnote she had to acknowledge before getting to the main text. I was nursing my second overpriced whiskey, seriously contemplating faking a medical emergency, when he materialized. Preston Vance. He was the gallery's biggest patron, a wealthy art collector who looked like he'd been assembled in a factory that specializes in creating smug, punchable faces. His suit was perfect, his hair was perfect, and he carried himself with the effortless confidence of a man who has never once had to fix something himself. The moment Genevieve saw him, her entire being changed. She lit up brighter than our Christmas tree, her eyes sparkling in a way they hadn't for me in a long, long time. Their conversation was a flurry of inside jokes and whispered comments, a private world I wasn't invited into. He barely glanced at me, offering a limp handshake and a condescending, the craftsman. They talked about late nights curating the new collection, and my gut clenched into a hard knot. The alarm bells weren't just ringing anymore, they were screaming. I wasn't just a footnote, I was a piece of the scenery. And I knew in that moment that this carefully staged evening was about to fall apart. And then, it did. ETPR pay. That moment has replayed in my head 1,000 times since. Preston Vance, with a smile that never touched his eyes, reached into his wallet. He didn't just say it, he performed it. He flicked a single crumpled dollar bill across the table, and it slid to a stop right in front of my water glass. "Don't worry, champ," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'll take good care of her tonight." The table erupted in laughter. Genevieve's friends, these polished strangers I'd never met, laughed like it was the joke of the century. But the real betrayal wasn't their laughter. It was Genevieve's. She had the decency to look embarrassed for half a second before she joined in, her laugh a sharp, clean blade twisting in my gut. The dollar sat there, a physical valuation of what this man, and by extension my own wife, thought I was worth. My mind was a white-hot forge, but my hands were steady. I picked up the dollar, folded it neatly into a small, tight square, and looked Preston dead in the eye. "Thanks," I said, my voice calm and cold. "That's the down payment for your upcoming hospital bills." The laughter died instantly, replaced by a tense, shocked silence. I stood, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out of the ballroom. I wasn't retreating. I was disengaging before I did something that would cost me more than my pride. I stepped onto the outdoor terrace to get some air. A limo driver stood smoking by the rail, looking as out of place as I felt. I borrowed his lighter, and we shared a moment of silence, two working men on the outside looking in. From the terrace, I had a perfect view of the entrance below. Minutes later, the doors swung open, and Genevieve, Preston, and their friends emerged, roaring with laughter. She never once glanced back, never looked for me. They all piled into a black Escalade that was waiting for them, and the car purred away into the Portland night. The nagging suspicion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I drove home not wondering, but knowing. The dollar bill in my pocket felt like a lead weight, a cold, hard fact. Later, at 4 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a transaction alert from our joint account. The Benson Hotel, $387.54. It wasn't a surprise. It was just the final invoice for my marriage. I took a screenshot of the charge and saved it. Divorce court loves documentation. At dawn, I heard the quiet purr of Genevieve's white BMW in the driveway. I watched from my workshop window as she crept into the house like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. I gave her 10 minutes. Then I walked into the kitchen. She was standing by the coffee maker in yesterday's makeup and a man's suit jacket, an expensive one, with the initials PV elegantly embroidered on the pocket. "You're up early," she said, her voice a guilty squeak. "Never went to sleep," I replied, my own voice flat and dead. "Where were you?" She launched into a flimsy, pre-rehearsed story about the party running late, about crashing on a colleague's couch. "Preston lent me this. It got cold," she explained, gesturing to the jacket as if it were proof of innocence instead of guilt. And then I saw it, just above the collar of her dress, a purple-red mark that had exactly one cause and zero innocent explanations. A goddamn hickey. Her hand flew to her neck as she stammered some pathetic lie about a curling iron, a lie so insulting it was worse than the truth. But the final blow wasn't the lie itself. It was what she did next. She immediately tried to act normal, turning away to make coffee, humming some pop song, and asking what we should do for dinner. She was trying to reset the day, to pretend our life wasn't bleeding out on the kitchen floor. That's when the last thread of our life together snapped, not with a bang, but with a quiet, final break. I was done being worth $1. Done being the embarrassing husband. Done pretending this was salvageable. The next morning, I was at the hardware store when it opened at 6 a.m. There's something deeply American about solving your problems there. Marriage falling apart? There's a product for that. Aisle 7, right next to the deadbolts. My mission was to buy locks so strong they could keep out the apocalypse and a cheating spouse. I grabbed 4 of them. They weren't just locks. They were a statement. In second, in down finger, Installing new locks when you're consumed by a cold, quiet rage is surprisingly satisfying. It's a cathartic act. Each turn of the screwdriver, a small, decisive victory. I was methodically replacing the old hardware that welcomed her in with shiny new barriers that would keep her out. Keys she didn't have. Keys she would never get. My oldest son, Noah, found me at the back door. He's 18, with eyes that see more than he lets on. He knew this wasn't a home improvement project. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice low. "Home security upgrade," I said without looking up from the deadbolt. "Making sure only the people who are supposed to be in this house can get in." He was quiet for a moment, processing. "Does Mom know about this upgrade?" "She's about to find out." "That's cold, Dad," he said. But it wasn't an accusation. It sounded more like he was impressed. He picked up a screwdriver and helped me with the last 2 doors, a silent partner in my quiet rebellion. By noon, our home had become my fortress. Genevieve had left for a yoga class, still clinging to the illusion of a normal Sunday. I sat in the living room with a beer and a book I wasn't reading, waiting. At 6:30 p.m., her white BMW pulled into the driveway. I heard her footsteps on the porch, the familiar jingle of her keys, then the sharp, metallic scrape as her key met a lock that no longer recognized her authority. Silence. Another, harder try. Then she yelled my name. "Cal!" I let her yell twice more before I opened the door. She stood there in her expensive yoga pants, her face a perfect mask of confusion and rising fury. "The key isn't working," she said, as if it were the lock's fault. "Yeah," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Neither is our marriage." Her jaw dropped. "What? Cal? That's not let me in. We need to have an adult conversation about this." "An adult conversation?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash. That's rich, coming from someone who spent last night in a hotel room and came home wearing another man's jacket. That's real mature behavior, Genevieve. Her voice climbed, losing control of the narrative she had so carefully constructed. "I told you. We were just—" "Go talk to Preston," I interrupted, feeling calmer than I had in days. "The guy who thinks I'm worth a single dollar. The guy whose initials are on the jacket you wore home. I'm sure he'd love to have an adult conversation with you." She tried to push past me, but I didn't budge. That's when I noticed the curtain twitching in the house next door. The neighbors were appearing, suddenly finding urgent yard work to do in the fading light. Genevieve saw her audience and immediately lowered her voice to a hiss. "You're being unreasonable. We need to talk about communication." "Communication?" I said, raising my voice just enough for the whole block to hear. "Communication ended when you turned our marriage into a group project. When you add a third person to a marriage without consent, that's not a marriage. That's a committee. And as of today, I'm resigning." Her face went blank, the shock finally breaking through her composure. She fumbled for her phone, stormed back to her car, and peeled out of the driveway, leaving a strip of rubber on the asphalt. I gave a polite nod to the neighbors and went back inside. The house was quiet, peaceful, and I realized in that moment that silence sounded infinitely better than my wife's presence. It was the saddest, most freeing thought I'd had in years. An hour later, Noah came downstairs. "Mom called me," he said, his expression carefully neutral. "She says you're overreacting, that you embarrassed her in front of the neighbors and are making a big deal out of nothing." "Did she happen to mention the nothing she was doing in a hotel room?" Noah held up a hand. "Dad, I'm just telling you what she said. She wanted me to try and convince you to let her back in." He paused, a slow grin spreading across his face. "I didn't say I'd try very hard." I couldn't help but let out a short, sharp laugh. "You're a good kid. I'm 18, Dad. I'm old enough to know when someone's bullshitting. We've all seen how she's treated you for years. Like you're some accessory she's embarrassed to show off. Like what you do isn't a real job. Honestly, it's been gross to watch. That hit me harder than the affair itself. I thought I'd hidden it better. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. Then it rang. I let it go to voicemail. The real fight was just beginning. The first I do. The next morning, the war went from a cold, silent standoff to a full-blown declaration. It arrived in a thick manila envelope from a prestigious downtown law firm. 3 pages of dense legalese boiled down to one breathtakingly audacious demand. Genevieve wanted half of everything. 50% of all marital assets, substantial monthly spousal support, the house, and the part that made my blood boil, a 50% stake in Shaw Woodcraft Designs, the business she'd always dismissed as my little hobby. The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost impressive. I immediately called my attorney, Marcus Thorne. He's expensive, but he enjoys a good legal fight the way I enjoy the complex grain of a perfect piece of maple. Marcus, I said, my voice tight. Business is fine. Marriage is dead. I need you to kill it officially before I get murdered in the process. There was a pause on the other end, then a dry chuckle. Finally, I was wondering when you'd call. My wife saw Genevieve out with some guy a few weeks ago at a wine bar. We figured it was only a matter of time. He let out a sharp laugh when I told him she wanted half the business. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the sound of a shark smelling blood in the water. His instructions were simple. Bring him every financial document I had and stop all contact with her. We're going to dismantle her, he said with relish. Legally and ethically, of course. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't rage or despair. It was hope. The next morning, I walked into his downtown office with a heavy banker's box containing my entire financial life. Sitting next to him was a woman named Evelyn Reed. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She was a forensic accountant. "Mr. Shaw," she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip, "I'm very good at finding where money goes when people think no one is looking." I unpacked my box of documents onto the polished conference table. As I laid out the statements, tax returns, and corporate filings, Evelyn's eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. The hunt had begun. "Marcus mentioned the hotel charge from the other night," Evelyn said, her fingers already flying across her laptop keyboard. "What card was it on?" "Our joint business Amex," I said. "It's supposed to be for client entertainment." Evelyn's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. A small, predatory smile touched her lips. "Oh, this is going to be good," she murmured. It didn't take her 20 minutes. She turned her laptop around, revealing a spreadsheet that made my stomach drop. "Your wife has been very busy with your money, Cal. In the last 6 months alone, she's charged over $40,000 to your business account. 5-star hotels in Seattle, spa weekends in Napa, Michelin-star dinners in Portland. This isn't client entertainment. This is an affair funded by your company." A strange mix of white-hot rage and cold vindication washed over me. "Can we use this?" I asked Marcus. "Oh, we're going to use the hell out of this," he said, grinning. "This doesn't just damage her claim for spousal support. This annihilates it. And it gets worse," Evelyn added, clicking to another screen. "Or better, for our purposes. She's been making regular wire transfers from your joint savings account to a private LLC. An LLC registered to one Preston Vance. Genevieve hadn't just cheated on me. She'd been systematically looting our finances to fund her lover, who was, in turn, funneling our money into his own shell company. The sheer, calculated audacity of it was breathtaking. Then Marcus looked at me, a strange, thoughtful expression on his face. "Cal, I need to ask you something. What's the full name of your business? Are there any subsidiaries, any other entities?" "Shaw Woodcraft Designs is the main company," I said. "But years ago, I invested the profits into a separate business that imports and exports rare and exotic lumber from around the world. It's just an investment that runs itself, mostly passive income. It's called Viridian Woods International." Marcus's face went blank. Then he started to laugh. Not a chuckle, but a full-blown, throw-your-head-back roar of pure, unadulterated joy. No, no way. I was confused for a second, my brain trying to catch up. Preston Vance, the wealthy art collector and gallery patron, what was his day job again? Something in acquisitions. And then, the pieces clicked into place with the force of a tectonic shift. He's the director of acquisitions, I said, the words feeling alien in my own mouth, at Viridian Woods International. The man who'd thrown $1 at me like I was a peasant was on my payroll. Marcus was wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "Evelyn," he said, his voice shaking with mirth, "pull up Viridian's employee roster. I think Mr. Shaw needs to schedule an immediate performance review. Use CN." The guy who threw $1 at his boss. The guy sleeping with my wife, funding his lifestyle with my own money, all while smirking at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. That guy cashed a paycheck that I, Caleb Shaw, signed off on every 2 weeks. My laughter could have registered on the Richter scale. It started as a low chuckle and built into a full-throated roar that had Marcus and Evelyn staring at me like I'd finally lost my mind. Maybe I had. "This," I finally managed to say, wiping a tear from my eye, "is going to be so goddamn beautiful." Marcus was already scribbling notes, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "Cal, my friend," he said, a wide grin spreading across his face, "we're not just going to win this divorce. We're going to make legal history." The following Tuesday, I walked into the sleek modern offices of Viridian Woods International. It was a world away from my sawdust-covered workshop, all glass and steel and quiet efficiency. My longtime assistant, Diane, who has the uncanny ability to know what I need before I do, had my coffee ready. "You've got that look," she said, her tone a mix of amusement and approval. "What look is that?" "The one that says someone is about to have a very, very bad day, and you're going to thoroughly enjoy it." "Diane," I said, taking a sip of the coffee, "schedule a mandatory meeting for all division heads. 10 o'clock sharp, conference room A, and pull Preston Vance's complete personnel file. I want everything." She just smiled, a small, satisfied smile. About damn time. By 9:45, I was seated at the head of the long, polished conference table, the infamous dollar bill folded neatly in my pocket. The division heads began to filter in, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. An unscheduled meeting with the owner was never a casual affair. At precisely 10 o'clock, Preston Vance strode in, carrying an expensive leather portfolio, the very picture of untouchable corporate confidence. Then he saw me. The color drained from his face as his brain struggled to compute the impossible. The blue-collar, wood-stained husband from the gallery was sitting in the owner's chair. He froze for a second before sinking into a seat at the far end of the table, his hands trembling slightly. "Morning, everyone," I said, my voice calm and casual. I let my eyes drift down the table until they locked onto his. A smile played on my lips, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Morning, Preston. I heard you had an interesting night out last Friday. How's Genevieve?" The room went so quiet, you could hear a pin drop on the expensive carpet. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the folded dollar bill, and slid it across the polished conference table. It spun once, twice, and came to a stop right in front of Preston's leather portfolio. "I believe," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "this belongs to you." He stared at it as if it were a live grenade. The silence in the room was absolute, suffocating. I don't understand," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Let me help you out," I said, leaning back in my chair, enjoying the moment. "That's the dollar you so generously threw at me, your boss, while making a crude joke about taking care of my wife. Remember now? Or were you too busy admiring your reflection in your champagne glass? You thought I was just some, what was it? Ah, yes, some craftsman you could insult?" The HR director, a woman in her 60s, made a small, strangled sound, like her soul was trying to leave her body. Preston, now visibly sweating through his expensive suit, opened his mouth to explain, but I cut him off. I'm not interested in your explanations. I am, however, very interested in professional conduct. Preston Vance, you're fired, effective immediately. For conduct unbecoming an executive of this company, security will now escort you from the premises. And just so we're clear, if you even think about filing for wrongful termination, my lawyers are extremely eager to discuss your relationship with my wife and your flagrant misuse of company time in open court. I felt nothing but a cold, clean satisfaction as two security guards entered the room and led him away, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The meeting was over. The real fallout came 3 hours later. A panicked, rambling voicemail from Preston to Genevieve was somehow forwarded to my phone, a technological miracle I'll never question. "You didn't tell me your husband owns the company!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You said he was just some carpenter. I just got fired, Genevieve, because of you. Because you couldn't be bothered to mention that your husband signs my goddamn paychecks." It was, without a doubt, the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The following week was a masterclass in watching a life unravel. Genevieve tried calling me dozens of times, leaving messages that cycled from tearful apologies to venomous threats. I never answered. She tried to use the kids as messengers, but they shut her down. Noah told her to stop putting them in the middle of her mess. Defeated, she moved in with her sister, no doubt playing the victim over glasses of expensive Chardonnay while her carefully constructed world burned to the ground. This glee for a temple. Marcus Thorne kept me updated on the legal skirmishes. Genevieve's lawyer was painting a masterpiece of fiction, portraying me as a controlling, vindictive monster and her as the neglected, delicate wife who made one little mistake in a moment of weakness. It was a standard, pathetic playbook. Let them try, I told Marcus over the phone. We've got the receipts. Receipts don't even cover it anymore, Cal, he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. Evelyn went deeper. She found 3 hidden bank accounts, opened over a year ago. Genevieve has been systematically siphoning money from our joint savings. The total isn't 40 grand. It's closer to 70. The day of the hearing, I was calm. I had moved past anger into something colder, more focused, like the steel of a well-honed chisel. Genevieve sat across the courtroom, dressed in a conservative navy dress, her hair pulled back demurely. She was playing the role of the wronged wife to perfection, a performance worthy of an award. Her lawyer delivered a dramatic monologue, casting me as a tyrant who had brutally destroyed her life over a simple misunderstanding. If you know you made it look right, it is internally 2012. When it was my turn to respond, I stood and kept my voice level and clear. Your Honor, I began, addressing the judge directly. My wife humiliated herself when she spent the night in a hotel with another man and came home wearing his jacket. I didn't create that humiliation. I just provided better lighting by refusing to pretend it wasn't happening. I paused, letting the words settle. And as for Mr. Vance, he wasn't fired out of personal spite. He was terminated for gross misconduct, specifically for sexually harassing the wife of his employer at a company function. That's when Marcus stood up, holding what he had gleefully referred to as our folder of doom. He approached the bench and laid it all out, with the quiet confidence of a man holding a royal flush. The bank statements, highlighted and annotated. The hotel invoices, with their incriminating dates and room numbers. The wire transfer records to Preston Vance's LLC. I watched the judge's face as she scanned the documents. It was like watching a master woodworker inspect a shoddy piece of furniture. First, the professional neutrality. Then, a flicker of interest as she found the first flaw. And finally, the quiet, profound annoyance of someone who hates seeing their time wasted on cheap joinery and bad faith. She looked up, her eyes fixed on Genevieve. Mrs. Shaw, the judge said, her voice sharp and devoid of sympathy. "Can you please explain to the court why you charged over $40,000 in personal expenses to your husband's business account, including multiple hotel stays and wire transfers to an LLC owned by a Mr. Preston Vance?" Genevieve froze, her carefully constructed composure shattering like cheap veneer. She shot a panicked look at her lawyer, who could do nothing but shuffle his papers. But the judge wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an even more dangerous level. "Furthermore, Mrs. Shaw, were you aware that at the time of these transactions, Mr. Vance was an employee of Iridian Woods International, a company owned entirely by your husband?" Dead silence. The only sound in the courtroom was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Genevieve stared down at her hands, her silence a confession more damning than any words could ever be. She had been caught not just in a lie, but in a conspiracy, and her entire case had just disintegrated into dust. Her fate was sealed, the wide in company. Genevieve's lawyer, in a last-ditch effort, tried to argue for spousal support, pleading that his client had dedicated 2 decades of her life to the marriage and was now being left with nothing. The judge let him finish, her expression a mask of stone. Then she cut him off. "Counselor," she said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom, "your client is not a victim. Your client stole nearly $70,000 from the marital estate to fund an extramarital affair with an employee of her husband's company. She will not be rewarded for fraudulent and malicious behavior. Here is my ruling." What followed was the most beautiful 15 minutes of my life. I was awarded full and sole ownership of the family home. I was awarded 100% of both of my businesses, Shaw Woodcraft Designs and Viridian Woods International, free and clear of any claim. I was granted full legal and physical custody of our minor children. Genevieve was ordered to repay the $70,000 she had stolen, effective immediately, and was also held responsible for all of my legal fees. "As for the assets Mrs. Shaw will retain," the judge said, squinting at a paper with what I swear was barely concealed amusement, "she will keep her personal belongings, her yoga mat, and a 2008 Toyota Corolla, which Mr. Shaw indicates he was planning to donate to charity." A choked laugh echoed from the back of the courtroom. It was Noah. I didn't even try to hide my smile. Genevieve just sat there, her carefully constructed victimhood shattered, black tears of mascara carving paths through her expensive makeup. Outside in the hallway, Noah gave me a high five that cracked like a bat. "Dad, that was better than any movie I've ever seen." My phone buzzed. It was a text from my daughter, Olivia. Mom's on the phone with Aunt Denise, crying about having to drive the Corolla. Best day ever. The story of the Portland craftsman who legally and financially dismantled his cheating wife and her corporate boyfriend didn't just spread, it detonated. A few days later, a young barista at my local coffee shop leaned in conspiratorially as he handed me my order. "Hey, you're the woodworker guy, right? The one with the dollar bill? Dude, legend." My story had gone viral in the artisan and design communities. Someone on Reddit created a meme, a picture of me in my workshop, covered in sawdust, with the caption, "Respect the craftsman. He might own the company that sells you your materials." My business phone started ringing off the hook. Designers from Seattle, architects from San Francisco, and wealthy homeowners from across the country all wanted a piece from Shaw Woodcraft Designs. My order backlog went from 2 months to over a year. The irony was so thick you could carve it. Genevieve had always been embarrassed by my blue-collar work, by the sawdust under my nails. Now that very work was being celebrated on a national level, and I was more successful than I had ever been. One night, standing in my workshop around 2 a.m., surrounded by the scent of cedar and varnish, the idea hit me. I could turn this entire disaster into something tangible. Something that celebrated integrity and endurance. A new line of furniture, a statement. The next morning, I called Noah into my workshop. He's sharp and has a natural talent for marketing. "I've got an idea," I said, showing him my sketches. A new premium line. We're calling it the Legacy Collection. What makes it different? He asked, studying the designs. Each piece gets a small, custom-forged metal plaque set into the wood, I explained, pointing to the detail on the sketch. On it were the words, "Crafted to endure, unlike trust." Noah burst out laughing. "That's savage, Dad. I love it." He built an entire marketing campaign around the concepts of craftsmanship, authenticity, and integrity. The subtext did all the heavy lifting. The Legacy Collection sold out its first run before we even finished building the first piece. We had a waiting list a year long. My kids found their own ways to process everything. Liam, my 15-year-old, took up boxing, channeling his anger into something productive. His twin, Olivia, threw herself into environmental activism, focusing on sustainable forestry. But it was my youngest 12-year-old, Sophie, who had been hit the hardest. One afternoon, she found me in the workshop after one of her therapy sessions. "My therapist says I should tell you how I feel," she said quietly, her small voice barely audible over the hum of the air filter. "I'm sad about Mom, but I'm really proud of you." I stopped sanding and turned to face her. "Proud of me?" "Yeah," she said, her eyes serious and clear. "My therapist said you stayed calm. You protected us, and you didn't make us choose sides. She said that not all dads do that." Something in my chest that had been tightly wound for months finally cracked open and released. That was it. That was the only victory that ever truly mattered. 6 months later, life had settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. Genevieve was working at a smaller gallery, living in a generic apartment complex, and, yes, driving that old Corolla. Preston had reportedly fled to California, last seen selling timeshares to tourists. As for me, my business was thriving beyond my wildest dreams. One evening, Noah joined me on the back deck, overlooking the vast Oregon forest. "You handled all that like a pro, Dad," he said, handing me a beer. I grinned, taking a long sip. "Son, sometimes you don't have to fight fire with fire. You just let the idiots light the match themselves and stand back to enjoy the show." That $1 bill is framed in my office now. Right below it is a small hand-carved plaque I made myself, bearing my new company motto, "Respect the man with sawdust on his hands." He probably owns the company,